Moving from the friend zone to the end zone. Thoughts on it, your advice for the homies.
I don't know why that term is end zone.
Hi everyone, thank you for tuning in to my channel Between the Lines, where we are going through an ongoing series entitled Off the Pulpit, where I get to interview people in my life outside of the commonly known arenas of their lives. So with that being said, our guest today is a Berman University legend graduating from the Religious Studies Department. He's a husband to Kalmani Amoah, a mentor of mine, creator of the Oracle podcast, and also Atoma. From being the chaplain at Fraser Valley, he's pastoring now, or he's going to pastor at La Sierra Church. And without further ado, Ben Amoah, welcome on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be part of what you do. I've been waiting to hear Between the Lines on from like 3 years ago, like 2 years ago. So I'm excited. I'm really excited to be on this. Thank you for having me, Tremlin.
Before we just dive into the questions that I have, why don't you tell us a little random fact about yourself?
Yeah, random fact. I think like the most random fact when I think of it, because like I think it's random for like people outside of Adventist circles, and especially outside of like Berman, where I grew up, growing up in Ottawa, like all my boys back home, or like when I tell anyone back in Ottawa, like they saw me grow up, they saw me go through. I was playing sports and you know just doing life. But I think now what a random fact about me is that I did gymnastics. It's like extremely random because like I guess it's like what like when and like, I think my friends back home would always be like how are you doing gymnastics? Like, what is that? Like, how did you get into that? Like, what happened to you? And I'm like, I don't really know how this changed in me like that. And so it is extremely random, but I love those years, those good time. But it is an extremely random thing about me.
Great, thanks for sharing. Afro Star for sure. So the first question I have is, what is your creative process like? As I mentioned earlier, you have a lot of different creative platforms where you do a bunch of different things. So if you could let us in on your creative process.
Yeah, like, I don't know. I think one of the things like that always gets me for like the spark of my creative process is like I like to see things and I'm like, man, like what would that look like if we had like kind of like a clear spiritual twist to it. I don't know why. That's what I always like to think of. So like when it comes to clothing, I like faith-based clothing. When it comes to like I see like cool video games, I'm like, oh man, how could I like help people understand God through that? Like that's always like kind of the base of it. But like I think I just always watch so much, and we'll get into this I think a little bit more. Like so much anime, so much cartoons, play so many video games, and so like those things are always like thrown in my head. And then like I spark, like it just sparks something in me that I'm just like, man, what would that look like if we had like a more, I guess, clear, direct path to sharing about God through this? And I just like, I'm like, it'd be so cool if like the church had something like that was like this, or it'd be so cool if the church had something that we made our own that was similar to this. Like, why can't we make like a church video game, or why can't we make like a church podcast that's like relevant, or why can't we make, And that's how it started. Even like when I made the Oracle podcast, I was driving back and forth from Macomb to Calgary, for my practicum, like driving like 2 hours one way, 2 hours back, and I was listening to like TED Talks all the time. I was like, man, I really loved this podcast. I started listening to other podcasts. Like I'd never listened to podcasts until that year, my last year at Berman. And I was like, I want something that like Christians, young Christians can listen to. And that's kind of what sparked it in me. So I always like think of like when I watch something that I know I really enjoy, I want more people to enjoy this, but I also want the people who I know who I can reach to enjoy it. So what can I do to spin it so that people can still receive that excitement from it that I've seen, but maybe more relevant to their life?
Great. You touched a bit on you being a fan of anime and watching it a lot. I personally am also a huge fan of anime. So let's just talk about that for a brief moment.
For sure.
What is your favorite anime and why?
A favorite anime all time. This is tough.
Yeah,
It's a hard question. And like, oh man, I'll
honorable
just run.
mentions.
Yeah, I'm gonna just run some like runner-ups like that are like what do I love, like some stories I really love. Some of my favorite stories to this day. It's gotta be like Demon Slayer, which is out right now. I love Demon Slayer. Got like all the manga. I just keep buying it. Like it's one of my favorite stories. It's not my favorite though. But I love it. Um, what else? I really like this one story I used to watch when I was a kid, Soul Eater. Man, I got like my whole thing behind me. I gotta take a peek back behind me. What do I really love? Oh, so many. I grew up watching Dragon Ball Z all the time. Like I love Dragon Ball Z. Um, I'm trying to like lead up to my favorite one. Death Note was like hands down one of like the dopest stories. Like it just so intelligent, so smart, and so I really was into that um, all the time. What are some stories I've read that I really couldn't put down? The story called Vagabond. It's a really old school one. There's a story Berserk, whose author just passed away. And so like it's really
Not either.
yeah. And like you got Attack on Titan, which is one of the craziest stories. As you know, if you ain't on that, please go find yourself and go figure that out because that's one of the most intense stories that like scared you at the beginning, then made you like kind of almost lose it, but then like the ending and just like the last bit, what we've been through, I'm talking about Trembling. What we've been through at the end of that has been crazy. And so that's it. But my favorite of all time has to be Full Metal Alchemist. Um,
Brotherhood or just the
well,
regular?
so I gotta say, let me add some pretext to that. So Full Metal Alchemist, when I was a kid, they made the first anime, right?
Yes.
And I would read the manga like kind of on the side,
Mm-hmm.
and I realized I'm like, oh, it's kind of cool. But the thing is, the show was being made faster than the manga, and
Yes.
so the show made its own turn at one point, and then ended. Like it was like I think like it was like a short show, but like it had its own turn and then it ended, and like, it was completely different than the manga. And so when they finished the manga, they remade the show. That's when they made Brotherhood, and
Yeah.
then that's when like so I like the first Full Metal Alchemist like caught my attention. Like I was into it, but then like so I stopped reading the manga. But then when I went to Brotherhood, and I reread the manga, I saw the six action story. Brotherhood is like that's like my favorite anime of all time. Like it's up there.
So good.
It's so good. I'm gonna tell you why. I'll tell you why because like what I love about it, I don't know. Like growing up, it was just me, and my older brother, and like I just really like it hits me a little different. Or like if you have like two siblings, and it's just like that's just like the story of like two siblings who are like try to like make time. Like I don't know if you know that feeling when like your parents are out
Mm-hmm.
and like you just kind of make do with whatever you got, and that's pretty much like what happened to Ed and Alphonse, right? And it's like they just were like curious kids and they just had each other. And like I remember, I mean, like it's kind of like I always like resonated with on a different level. Like my dad, like being away when I was a kid, like Hohenheim leaving, my mom always working, and like their mom like passed away. And I'll say like my mom passed away, but it's just like that feeling of like absent parents for a bit in times of your life, and then you just try and make do with whatever you can. And then it's like from that they have a full adventure, and it's like that's like every like sibling's dreams. Like when your parents aren't around, like you're trying to make an adventure of your life, and like that's why I just love it, and it's so real. The emotions, everything about it. Full Metal Alchemist, Brotherhood, wow.
Dang. And also, if I could add on to that, like when I watched Full FMA Brotherhood, like what really caught my attention was also kind of how spiritual it was. Like, I don't think I was really expecting that anime to go that deep. And what I loved about the way the story was told was that it starts off with like these two young brothers who try something new, but they kind of make a mistake
Mhm,
in what they're trying out, and they're just
mhm,
trying to, you know, take away the consequences of that mistake. And so they go through this whole adventure, so many episodes, so many chapters through,
mhm,
but the more they go, the deeper they realize their issue is. And I think, I don't know, that like storytelling from where you think it's like, oh, just an innocent like slice of life, like
it's
whatever,
deep.
and it ends
It's deep.
up in like the countries involved, like your leaders are involved, like the things that
Yeah.
you put your trust in, like have become questionable to these characters. And I thought the storytelling was just so unique. So If you
Crazy.
if you don't mind, let's unpack like kind of the science of anime. Why do you think it's something that's so impactful, like that has gained an international audience? Yeah, like what's your take on it?
I think it's very similar to, I mean, like almost cartoons now. I think almost anime has propelled like the concept of adult cartoons, like adult animations, like the shows like, that exist now, because it's like we can make something that isn't just for kids, but that's animated, right? And I think like for so long, I'm like that's why I think it's so funny. Like when I think about anime now, like growing up, like I had to be so like sneaky about watching anime because my boys would like roast me, right? Like they'd be like, "Yo, like what's wrong with you watching like Chinese cartoons?" I'm like, "Yo, it's not Chinese, man. Stop." Right? And like they're like always roasting me, and then like I'll never forget that day where like one of my boys used to make fun of me so much, like obviously like just so goofy about it, like making me feel so ashamed about anime. Like one time, I was following Crunchyroll on Instagram, like it was like 4 years ago, after a lifetime of making fun of me, and I was on Crunchyroll, and like there was like a picture of Itachi as a kid, and it was like who had the saddest background story in all of all of Naruto, and I commented, like my guy. I like I just wanted to do that. Like I just like commented on stuff on Instagram, and I commented on it, and then my boy liked my comment, and I was like, wait, what the? I texted him. I'm like, yo, why'd you like my? How'd you even see that post? He said, oh yeah, I follow Crunchyroll. I'm like, why do you follow Crunchyroll? He's like, I love anime. I'm like, yo, you're a snake. I was so angry. I was like, no, years of torture. Um, but I think like there is something amazing about anime because it takes really, really real themes of life, and it just like adds um a really fictional twist. And obviously that's how all literature most of the time is. That's how it all is. But there is like a beauty to it of just like exaggerated emotions constantly, um, and like or like exaggerated feelings, because like I think what triggers that is that like we live in a life where we suppress our feelings so much. It's
Mm,
scary to be vulnerable.
mm,
And so it's like things like I think anime is very intentional about, just like the music in every episode, the characters, the way they feel. Like when something happens, it's super extra. Or like if something happens, like like I think about like in Death Note when like Light Yagami, he's like writing, and like he's writing the name, and it's like like he swings his pen, and like it looks like I don't know, it looks so intense, but I'm like, yo, my guy's just writing, but the stuff is flying around. I'm like, what's going on here? Or like like there's a show called Food Wars, which I've like barely watched, but I heard it's kind of sketch. But like like he's cooking food and it's super intense. Or like whenever somebody's doing anything, it's always super extra. Like that's like the thing about anime, something is extra, right? But it puts in this like spin of life that you're like, man, like I wish I could be a little bit more extra with how I feel about things, right? And I think like that's just how it is. Like, cause someone always gets at you if you're too much, right? Like if you're too laughy, if you're too loud, if you're too cryy, right? But then anime is a world where that's always accepted. Like there's always that one character that's crying really loud all the time, right? There's always that one character that's really like bold about stuff, and there's tropes about it. But then you're like, man, like how come there's no tropes about life? Like our trope is that like we're just too scared to be vulnerable.
mm,
And so I think the science of anime and just exaggeration is what gets you. And like I'll be watching anime, like I just started watching this one called To Your Eternity. One of my students suggested it to me. And like I'm watching it, and it's just like I always avoided like sad animes because I don't like being sad because I know it'll get me. But I'm watching it, and it's just like legit, like the story isn't even like that like written out so far, but
mm,
just like sad scenes. I'm just like tearing up, but I'm like, man, like I think it's like I run so much far away to like, so when I see it so exaggerated, like it triggers it in me,
mm.
right? And so it's like, yeah, I need to just, it pushes me to like think about like my feelings and like actually approaching how I feel in things. And so that's the science of anime. Like it clicks with us. It hits us with those feelings that we try to run away from so much every day.
Now, in our like Christian world, I feel like I've definitely heard people say that media's entertainment and all those that like whole world is on the opposite side of the spectrum with biblical truth. So if biblical truth is here, then media and entertainment and kind of
Yeah,
stuff is like on the complete opposite side.
yeah,
For you, do you think that there's an intersect? And if so, what does that look like?
yeah. Oh man. like media and the church, media and the Bible have been polarized like our whole childhood, right?
Yeah.
Um, I remember stuff like uh, the truth behind hip hop, like when I was a kid. And there's this video, like, I don't know, they used to show that black teachers like all day because they knew like black kids that listen to hip hop. And like, man, we would be on that. And it's like this like video at AY, and it was like so scared. It's like, yeah, you listen to that rap, play it backwards. There's demons in it and stuff like that. I'm like, yo, what the? And like I'd listen to them, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I can't stop. I gotta stop listening to Eminem or Lil Wayne or something because like there's like demons in it. Or like what else? They were like ripping Disney. They were ripping like anything that possible. Like now on YouTube, they're still active and they like find whatever that's like new and they'll just like dissect it and say, yeah, you like that? Well, it's demons. Like, you know, well, you like that? Well, the Bible talks about this thing. And like, I think it's just like we've become so polarized about things, and like the church has always been polarizing us that it's like makes us like we're so scared of that like balance of what it means to be in the world, of the world, all that type of stuff. But like, man, when I look at media, when I look at shows, when I look at books, when I read books and stuff like that, and I see like what people can make, how could I not see God in that? And the reason why I say like you can see God in these things, I think they intersect constantly. And we need to start looking at the intersection if we want to be one relevant, if we want to be able to reach a younger generation that's constantly in those things. It's like, how can you ignore God being in something that's created when God is the ultimate creator? Like God was the first creator of existence. And God gave us the ability to create. That's what that was all about, right? He gave us 6 days to create, and then like one day so you can just rest after your creation, after what you've tried to make. And so when people create things, that is legitimately people using God's gift the gift that God's given us. That's actually our calling to create in the way that we know that we're able to in our gifts. And so that simple fact that someone's creating something I think can be a motivation. I'm not saying like this is not like a blanket statement for everything, but the
Yeah.
simple fact that like, you know, like the simple fact that like somebody can create something, we can't ignore like God being somehow part of it in like maybe a tiny way. Because that's literally legitimately an imitation or a following or a mimic of what God did for us. God created us. So every creation is like a form of what God's done, right? And some people use it for wrong, some people use it for harm, and right, and that's what we have to be aware of. But like the simple fact of creation is a gift from God. And so I think like we have to see that, like the themes and stuff. Those are things that like we see in the Bible. And I think that helps us bring a clear understanding. Because I think one of the things about the Bible is timeless. The Bible is a timeless book. And that's the beauty of it, right? But like what people can create today also can help us understand things, the themes that we see in the Bible, more that's happening like relevant to what we're in right now. And so I don't think they got to be separate. Like I love like I teach Bible class. Some of my students, they know they think it's a theater. Like I show movies all the time. Like I show like I do that stuff all the time. Like because I think like there's themes there that like you can see God in it. And like people have talked about like podcasts I listen to, and you know, it's like everything is spiritual. And I think like that's like I think that's a great statement. Like yeah, you can't just like look at it like every single thing is spiritual, but can you learn about God from everything? And I think that's true. You can. Even things that are bad, you can learn about God, right? To see like what God isn't like.
Mm.
But I think when we try and make it seem like God isn't in some things or like he's not there or he's here, like we're trying to limit God. I don't think that God directs everything, but I think God is everywhere. And so if we can identify God in things or see what we can learn about him or see what he is like or what he's not like or what he does, what he doesn't do, that's how we can see God. And so we don't need to shy away from media, from the creations of people, what people are mimicking God. I think that's an amazing gift that we have.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take on it. I also feel like when it comes to different creations and stuff like that, like as you mentioned, okay, wait, context. So I'm reading through the book of Exodus, and it's crazy because God will like give instruction to Moses or whatever and say, like, no, you need to get like people who are so skilled in their craft that like he describes those people as gifted with the spirit of wisdom. Like they just have the spirit of wisdom with them just because they're so good at their creative craft. And I think about like our world today and how there are so many talented people who have like the mind of storytelling or the mind for being artistic and stuff like that. And as you mentioned earlier, like when I view shows or when I view movies, I always think to myself, like, man, if there was a twist, you know what I mean? Like how it could really appeal to people's hearts and stuff like that. So yeah, thanks for sharing your take on it. And now we're gonna switch topics and jump into relationships. So we're gonna do a speed round of a few questions for relationships. And so the first one that I have is moving from the friend zone to the end zone. Thoughts on it, your advice for the homies.
I don't know why that term is end zone.
Go to the end zone. Let's go.
Can you? I am no way some relationship pro. I am blessed to find the love of my life, and I'm a whole mess, and so I'm just thankful that Calmany is accepting me as my mess, and that we're both imperfect people, but we love each other, and we're gonna keep trying for the best. So I'm no way no love doctor or anything, but I think moving from the friend zone to the end zone, that is a difficult stage because uh, people, it's hard for people to change what they're comfortable about. We're comfortable, we get comfy easy. And so if I know that I can have like a deep relationship with somebody, but it doesn't like restrict me or have any require as much sacrifice, right? Like most of the people in the friend zone, like you're in that, like if okay, sorry, let me just back it up. Friendships are fine. Like if people if you're fine like being friends, but the friend zone kind of implies that you're somewhere where you don't want to be, but like the person is making you stay there kind of thing, right? Like if we're saying friend zone,
Yes.
I think like the problem with being in the friend zone is that like someone is kind of allowed, or you've allowed somebody to think that like they're able to get what they're getting from you without sacrifice. Like they don't have to put in that effort, or and so I think the only way to get out of the friend zone, whether positively, I think the end zone doesn't have to mean being with the person. The end zone just means getting out of that friend zone. And I think the way to get to the end zone is just by knowing your value, um, recognizing that you don't deserve to not receive uh, like reciprocal like friendship or time, right? Like I think it's unfair for you to just be used like a service in any relationship. Like, oh man, like I know that I could just like get that time or that laugh from that person, or they'll stay on the phone with me, but like I don't want anything more than that. But then it's like that. But then at the same time, that person can be talking to other people and having the exact same connection, etc. And
Mhm.
so to get out of the end zone, I think it's like you gotta wake up and be like, I deserve more than that. If like my feelings for that person, if you're okay with that friendship and it's like mutual friendship, fine. But if you know like you want more, but that person's not giving you more, or like doesn't want more, right? Which is fine too. You have to make the choice and be like, I gotta let go. And I think like once you make your choice, that puts a person in in the seat that they need to make a choice, and maybe they'll make a choice for the better for that person. Like, hey, like I do actually want something more with you. You're blessed. They don't. You got to leave that. But the problem is, sometimes people make that step and then they realize the person doesn't want them. Then they'll go back to the friend zone. You're like, oh man, don't do that. All right. So I think what you got to do is just like value yourself. Know that you don't deserve to be in a zone for somebody. You deserve mutual respect, mutual love, mutual time, and if you're not getting that, but you know you want more, and the person doesn't want to give you more, you got to respect that. If you know the person doesn't want to give you more, but likes kind of the attention that they're getting, you got to respect yourself more. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just like kind of
Yeah, for sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. So the next question in relationships is, how do you solve a conflict in a relationship? Butting heads or something, disagreements?
yeah. Whew. Breathing first. Uh, not thinking. I think making sure you listen is the biggest thing. Man, when you're in a conflict, it's so tempting to listen just to be heard.
Hmm.
Like you only listen so that you can share something or to respond. You listen to just respond. You don't really care what the person's saying. Like it's like you're hearing the word, but like the second you hear one, you're just forming a response. So as they're talking, you're not even hearing them.
Mm.
And I think like that, like you can't solve that. Just adds more conflict because then you're responding to the person, and they don't even feel like you heard them back, and then they're annoyed at that, and then you're annoyed that they didn't do the same back to you. And just boom, 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 it just piles up. I think like listening, slowing down, listening, not to just respond, but listening to listen. It's like one of the biggest ways to heal conflict because most of the time, a conflict comes from a lack of communication.
Mm.
Like unless like there's like some malicious intent or there's sometimes it's just like full-on mistakes and stuff like that. But like it's just like I didn't understand this or I thought this, and that's all it is. But because we get frustrated before we even get to that point of trying to listen, we don't listen to each other, and then we just keep adding to it, and then it just starts snowballing really fast. Like it's incredible. One thing I've just learned about in since I've been married is just that like, yeah, like when you don't listen, things like argument can go from 0 to 100 like so fast, like or like any conflict can just go from 0 to 100 so fast because no one's listening to each other. And then like you start getting like nitpicking things about little stuff, and then you're like, I don't know, and it's just like, man, like why don't I just listen? And when you do, everything just calms down. Everything's just so nice. If you just listen to listen, not listen to respond, listen to listen to just get your like 2 cents in. Just listening. That's how you can solve conflict.
Hmm. Well,
Again,
yeah.
I'm no pro though. I'm no pro.
I think listening is huge though. Like in any, whether platonic or romantic, any relationship given, I think listening, not to be heard, but to hear the other person for what they're actually saying. I think that's a huge step. It's very hard to do because
Yeah,
I feel like oftentimes we get into like defense mode or attacking
that's
mode
right.
so
That's
quickly
right.
that we just want to build up our walls or whatnot. So like letting the other person step in with their words, whatever they have to say, could be a bit of a difficult task, but I think when it's done, it does do a lot of healing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So when you have conflicts, let's just say you're in a romantic relationship, you've seen this person at their lows, at their highs, a whole mix of who that individual is. How do you know if that person is the one?
Oh man, that's a really tough question. I know that person is the one after all that you've been through. Um, I think like there isn't a one person.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the sense of like I don't think like we're so determined or like determinism. Like I don't believe that we're so determined in our life that like God has one person for you, and that person might be in Thailand, so you got to make sure you find them there. Like I don't think that's how life is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but how you know somebody is the one is one like there's triggers and things that you can notice in your relationship as you're building, as you know each other, how you handle conflict, how you bounce back from conflict. That's one of the things, right? Do you build each other up? um like is there more pain than growth? I think that's something we got to check for all of our relationships. Is there more pain or is there more growth? Or is it just like more like, and I don't mean like, because I think it's like trigger like we can kind of be like, if I don't feel good or if it's not good times, I need to be out. Because I think like good times can go and come, bad times go and come. But like, is there pain like damaging like yourself? Like, do you feel like you're unsafe? Do you feel like you yourself are becoming a worse version of yourself, or do you feel like you're growing because of that person? Like, are you becoming more aware of humanity of somebody else? Are you becoming more selfless? And I think that if you're growing, I think that's a check. That's a big check mark. Um, but ultimately, and I say that all those to lead up to this is just like when you notice all those things, I think you have to make the choice after. If you see that there's a lot of growth, if you see that conflicts aren't the end after like a conflict, like after a conflict, it doesn't feel like terminal. If you see that you were able to do life together on little things, not saying you have to match exactly all your hobbies and stuff, but like are you able to be present for each other in things like that? I think what you need to do is then, if you know that, if how you know they're the one, are you willing to choose them over and over again for the rest of your life?
Mm.
And that's what marriage is, right? And that's what that next step is. It's like, I'm going to choose you for the rest of my life. And so you have to make that choice. And I think um, you know the type of person somebody is before you make that final choice. And so you need to choose if someone's the one that's like up to the person, like, you know what I mean? Like, uh, you could ask God for signs and God's good and he may give you some signs and some snowfall or some wet cloth or dry cloth, something like that, right? But um, someone being the one has to be a choice. And I think that's the beauty of it, right? Like God chose us. That's how we know we're the one for God. Like that's how God works for all of us. All of us, all of humanity is the one for because He chose us. It wasn't something that like the person had to do, or like had to look away after. Like, you know, that's how God does it. But then for us, we look at the relationship that we've built, and then we have to make the choice. Like, am I going to choose you all the time? So you know somebody's the one when you choose for them to be the one after evaluating your time that you've been together, and then you make that choice. Like, I'm going to choose that person over and over and over again.
Last question for our relationships section. You've been in a relationship for some time, you're married. What are some of the myths or like things that were super overly romanticized in like media or whatnot that aren't necessarily true?
One of the things is just like what isn't true. Honeymoon stage. I'll say like stuff like this. This is what I'll say. We can have like this big image, I think, of like um I mean, I'll just say like as like cleanly as possible, or like without sounding like strangers. I don't know what the audience is and stuff, but like, especially when it comes to marriage and stuff, or like when you're being with somebody, we always think, especially like I'll say in like a Christian context or like being raised in the Adventist church, we always make it seem like uh, being like intimate with somebody, like say sexually and stuff like that, is like this um like light switch that like comes on when you're married and that's it. And you just know everything. And I think like that's like a big thing that like people uh don't talk about enough. And
Yeah.
like we and then like it's a big myth, like because everyone's always like, oh yeah, like honeymoon, like all this type of stuff has to look like this way. And you're like, it's
Yeah.
just not like that. And like life is just very different. And there's so much more to us than like being sexual beings. And so it's just like very different. I think that's like a huge concept that like people don't talk about in the church or in our circles, that like um yeah, like being sexuality is just very different than what you would ever expect. But it's still beautiful. It's an extremely beautiful thing, but it's
Mhm.
just not what you expected, not the picture that you see on TV or people talk about. It's like it's not like that, but it's beautiful. That's one thing. um Man, like finding time with hobbies, that's a big thing. You get this pressure that you see on TV that people do the exact same things all the time. Like you see those couples jogging, or they do like they vlog together, and they do stuff together. And you're like, man, like, oh, that looks cool. But when you get to life and like life's happening, you're like, man, maybe we don't do all the exact same things together. But that's okay. And that's what I was talking about earlier. It's like we got to be present for each other though, no matter what. And so even though on your top list might not be like, for example, my wife is extremely outdoorsy and she's really cool. She loves doing that stuff, like going to the beach, going for walks, stuff like that. And I'm like, I grew up going camping and stuff with Pathfinders and stuff like that. Like I love being indoors, watching movies and stuff, and she loves that stuff too, right? And but it's like, um, if I know it's like just because it's not on my top list doesn't mean I can't be present. Or like, can we learn to do things that we love in the same area together or by each other? Because at the end of the day, hobbies are nice. And like you can always find people to do things that you love doing with, but like where you need to always find ways to prioritize time with this person you chose to be with for the rest of your life. And so whether it means like I'm going to play a game while Calmini's reading or a book beside me, I want to do beside her, right? Those things, finding those type of things. But it doesn't have to be cookie cutter. Like we both are the exact same, have the exact same interests at the exact same time. It's not
Mhm.
how it is. Even though sometimes people show it like that on TV and stuff, it ain't like that. You're gonna have different hobbies, different interests, but you just find ways to do it in each other's presence, and
Yeah.
you balance it and sacrifice times where you can do something that you're not super comfortable with, so that that person can enjoy, or they do the same for you. And so that's like the biggest thing I think is a myth, is that like we have to be like the exact same interest, doing the exact same things at the exact same time. But it's not like that whatsoever. And so that's what comes to my mind to answer that question.
Yeah. Our last question is, how do you capitalize on uniqueness in ministry? So essentially, how do you avoid this cookie cutter mentality where you
Yeah.
copy this preaching style of someone else or the methods of another person? How do you embrace and capitalize on your individuality?
Yeah. Well, it starts off by one, and this sounds cliche, but it's like knowing yourself, right? So you need to know what your gifts land in. Whether you need to do some character inventories, some Myers Briggs stuff. I don't know what you got to do. If you got to start off by figuring out who you are, that's a big thing, right? Not saying that like I don't think those things are also like this is your standard, this is who you are for the rest of your life, because those things are good advice, but that's not all you are. So nothing you can't grow, right? But um don't try to be somebody that you're not. God made us unique and we all have unique gifts. And so make sure you try your best to follow in your gifting
Mm.
because that's how you can produce the best thing when you wear your own armor. Classic story of David, but like you have to wear your own armor, right? You got to do what's best for you. Another thing I think for ministry side of it is we need to do ministry for our community rather than trying to like okay sorry let me try and figure out how to word this. We need to do it for ministry. We need to know our community and let us minister them rather than to create ministries and try and fit into our community, because it's like I see stuff all the time that happen on TV, big mega churches, churches that are really like doing things cool, even Adventist churches that are doing really cool things. I see how some youth groups look. I see how, like when you see churches like that post on Instagram that are so aesthetic and stuff like that, right? And that stuff is dope, right? I love the look, and I think that's like a really dope motivation for like creating like a church one day. um like it's good to be motivated to do something like that. Like I want to be able to make things look that way, but you have to know your community, because if you don't know your community you're just going to end up doing something that's superficial, that's just copied. Where like I because my group of kids, because I know my group of kids, because I know um like I know exactly what they need or what they're going through. I won't just copy Elevation Church and just try and give them Elevation Church model. That just doesn't make sense,
Mhm.
right? And so I think sometimes we get cookie cutter and we get unauthentic because we just see something that looks good and we try and imitate it rather than seeing what our community needs and then trying to do something from within them, from with being inspired by other things, and then presenting something that they need or that they will respond to. And so I would say know yourself and then know your community rather than just knowing, or rather than like I feel like we have so much pressure to produce so fast that we just constantly just spend hours looking at other churches, other preachers, other people, and just like I'll just do what they do. But then you're like, maybe what they do is just good for their community. It doesn't have to be good for you. Like I think like I love gospel music. I grew up on gospel music. I grew up on black churches. Then I came to BC. I'm like, what? And I had to realize that like that's just not the way I could do ministry here. It's not the same. But if I
Mhm.
just try to copy what I did back home in BC, that wouldn't be responded to, right? And I would just be like, maybe people would be kind of hype about it, but then it would die out. Right? It has to be something that they know that they need that comes from within them. And so to make it not cookie cutter, to make it genuine, know yourself, know your community, produce from within, while being inspired by the outside, by being inspired by all the things you see. But don't just start at what you see outside and then
Mhm.
just try and bring it.
Yeah, great advice, great advice. And so that being said, that concludes our conversation and our interview. Thank you so much, Ben, for being a part of this. And yeah, thank you again for watching and for tuning in to today's episode. And we'll catch you guys next week.